She had nothing, less than nothing. An hour ago, she'd had a future. Now all she had was the dusty heat of a Texas town called Dusty Fork and the clothes on her back. A 1,000-mile journey from New Orleans, all for nothing. The letters filled with promises of a shared life, a meeting of minds, they were all lies. Or rather, the man who wrote them was dead. Samuel Pike, the educated man who wanted an educated wife, had been in the ground for 3 months. His brother, Thaddeus Pike, was the one who met her at the stagecoach depot. He had eyes like frozen river water and a sneer that could curdle milk. He looked at her navy blue dress, her pale skin, her slender frame, and laughed, a sound like rocks in a tin can. "This is what my fool brother spent his money on," he'd said, his words dripping with contempt. "A skinny little bookworm who couldn't birth a calf, let alone a son." He took everything, her trunk, her father's precious cartography instruments, the rolled-up maps that held a lifetime of knowledge. He even took the small daguerreotype of her parents, her last link to a life that was now just a ghost. "Consider it payment for the trouble," he'd spat before leaving her in the middle of the street. His final piece of advice? Try the saloon. Maybe the boys could find a use for her. So she sat on the steps of the general store, a ghost in a town that didn't even notice she was there. The sun beat down, the dust blew, and the last of her hope evaporated into the merciless Texas sky. She had no money, no friends, no skills this brutal land valued. She was an alien creature, washed up on a hostile shore, and that's when the thought came. It wasn't a sudden flash. It was a slow, creeping fever. At the edge of town, the railroad tracks gleamed under the sun. A train whistle cut through the afternoon heat. It was a way out, a simple, final solution. She stood up, her legs stiff, and started walking. Past the saloon, past the dozing sheriff, past the last vestiges of a town that had already condemned her. The rails were warm beneath her hands as she sat down, arranging her skirts with a strange final tidiness. The ground began to tremble. A dark smudge of smoke appeared on the horizon, growing larger with every passing second. The whistle screamed, a herald of her deliverance. She closed her eyes, trying to picture her mother's garden in New Orleans, the scent of jasmine, the feel of her father's hand guiding hers across a map. The thunder of the engine was almost upon her. The ground shook violently. This was it. The end. But another sound cut through the roar of the train, a sound that didn't belong, the thunder of hoofbeats moving faster than any horse she'd ever seen. Her eyes snapped open. A rider was bearing down on her, a cloud of red dust billowing behind him. He wasn't a townsman, he was Comanche, and he was riding straight for her. The Comanche warrior was a whirlwind of motion. He didn't slow down, didn't hesitate. Just as the locomotive loomed over her, a monstrous beast of iron and steam, he swung down from his galloping horse. An arm like a steel band wrapped around her waist, yanking her from the tracks. They tumbled onto the hard-packed earth just as the train thundered past, a deafening roar of screeching metal and blasting heat. Gravel and cinders rained down around them, his body shielding hers from the storm. For a long moment, they just lay there, the ground vibrating as the last of the freight cars rattled by. When the silence of the prairie returned, he rolled off her and stood in one fluid motion. He was tall, his skin the color of burnished copper, his dark hair braided with leather and feathers. But it was his eyes that held her. They were as dark and deep as a midnight sky, and they missed nothing. "You were going to let it kill you," he said. It wasn't a question. His English was precise, laced with an accent she couldn't place. Shame washed over her. I had nowhere else to go." The words sounded so weak, so pathetic. He studied her, his gaze taking in her torn dress, her tear-streaked face. "You are not from here. You came for Samuel Pike." Elise's head snapped up. How could he possibly know that? Something in his expression tightened at the name. His brother, Thaddeus, She couldn't bring herself to say it, to relive the humiliation. "Thaddeus Pike," the warrior said, and the name was a curse on his lips. There was a history there, a dark and bitter one. "I know of him. What did he do to you? He took everything, she whispered. My money, my belongings, my father's instruments and maps. He said I was worthless. The warrior's eyes narrowed. Your father was a map maker? A cartographer, she corrected, a flicker of old pride returning. For the French government, he taught me everything. What kind of maps? There was a sudden urgency in his voice, a sharp intensity that made her lean forward. Territorial surveys, water sources, mineral deposits, boundary lines established by treaty. She paused, realizing who she was talking to. And, and proposed routes for the new railroad. Routes that would cross through tribal lands. The warrior went very still. The wind whipped a strand of her hair across her face, but she didn't notice. His gaze was fixed on the distant, dusty buildings of the town. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. My name is Joseph Running Bear, he said, and I think Thaddeus Pike has stolen something that belongs to both of us. Both of us? Elise asked, confused. Joseph turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw a fire that matched the burning Texas sun. Those maps you speak of, they are a death warrant for my people. They show the path the railroad wants to carve through the heart of our lands. Lands promised to us by treaties the white man now wants to forget. A spark, tiny and fragile, ignited within Elise. Something she hadn't felt since she'd stepped off that stagecoach. Hope. Could we use them to stop it? To prove the treaties are being broken? Perhaps, Joseph's voice was grim. But first we have to get them back. And a man like Pike doesn't just steal maps for the sake of knowledge. He's not a scholar. What do you mean? Men like Pike only see one thing: profit. Survey maps showing mineral deposits, military documents showing the most strategic routes. That's not just information, little map maker. That's a treasure. He won't just use them. He will sell them. To the railroad, to mining companies, to anyone with enough gold. He'll sell the future of this land to the highest bidder. The true scale of Thaddeus's theft crashed down on Elise. It wasn't just her inheritance. It was the fate of a people, the future of an entire territory, all rolled up in her father's leather case. Pike was about to auction off the soul of the frontier. We have to get them back, she said, her voice shaking, but not with fear, with a newfound resolve. Joseph studied her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. It will be dangerous. Pike surrounds himself with hired guns, men who shoot first and never ask questions. And you, he gestured to her torn dress, her refined city-bred appearance. You are not built for this kind of fight. Elise lifted her chin. The woman who had sat on those tracks was gone. In her place was someone else, someone forged in humiliation and desperation. I may not look like much, she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. But I know those maps better than any person alive. My father taught me every line, every symbol, every secret notation. Thaddeus Pike may hold the paper, but he doesn't understand the power he's stolen. For the first time, a genuine smile touched Joseph Running Bear's lips, transforming his harsh features. Then perhaps, he said, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light, it is time we taught Mr. Pike the true value of a skinny little bookworm. He swung onto his horse and extended a hand down to her. As she took it, allowing him to pull her up behind him, she saw a dust cloud on the horizon, a wagon heading away from town, Pike returning to his fortress. But he was no longer just some cruel bully who had robbed her. He was the enemy. And this was no longer just her story of survival. It was the beginning of a war. The hidden canyon was an oasis, a secret world carved into the red rock. A spring bubbled from the earth, feeding a small, clear pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. It was a place of peace, a sanctuary from the brutality of the world outside. My people have known this place for generations, Joseph said as he helped her down. The white man's maps do not show it. For the first time since leaving New Orleans, Elise felt like she could breathe. She sat on a flat rock by the water, the cool air a balm on her sunburnt skin. Joseph tended to his horse, his movements economical and precise. Tell me more about the maps, he said, his back still to her. Everything you remember. Elise closed her eyes, summoning the images of her father's work. There were the territorial surveys from the 1840s showing the exact treaty lines, water rights documentation mapping every spring and creek for hundreds of miles, mineral surveys, copper, silver, even some coal deposits. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. And three different proposed routes for the railroad. My father noted that the northernmost route was the fastest, but it cut directly through Comanche treaty lands. He wrote in his notes it would require military action to clear the way. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and cold. Joseph's jaw was a hard line. For 10 years we have listened to their promises. The treaties will be honored, they say. But their promises are like morning mist. They vanish when the sun grows hot. He looked at her, his eyes burning with a controlled fire. These maps are the proof that they have been lying from the very beginning. So if we get them to the right authorities, Elise began, but Joseph cut her off with a harsh laugh. Authorities? You mean Sheriff Carter in Dusty Fork, who takes Pike's gold every Friday? Or Judge Morrison in San Antonio, who owns 1,000 shares of railroad stock? There are no authorities who will stand against a man like Pike when there is a river of money to be made. Her hope faltered. Then what can we do? There is one man, Joseph said slowly, as if weighing the words. A federal marshal in Amarillo, William Hartley. They say he is an honest man, that he can't be bought. If we could get the evidence to him, not just the maps but proof of Pike's plans. An idea born from years of watching her father organize his meticulous files began to form in her mind. Pike is arrogant, but he's not a cartographer. He knows the maps are valuable, but he won't understand why right away. He'll need to study them, maybe even hire someone to interpret the survey notations and mineral assays. Joseph leaned forward, his interest piqued. How long would that take? Days, maybe a week. He doesn't know what he has yet, not fully. It's just a trunk full of paper to him. We have time. Time to do what? To get them back, she said, her voice firm, before he realizes their true worth. Joseph stood and began to pace, the hunter's instinct taking over. Pike's ranch is a fortress, 15 miles from town, crawling with his men. A direct assault is suicide. He also has a mining office in town, on Main Street. Is it guarded? Day and night. Sheriff Carter sees to that. Joseph stopped pacing and looked at her, a new calculating light in his eyes. But there might be a way. It would be a terrible risk, and it would require a particular kind of skill. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her slight frame. The office has a small window in the back, facing the alley. Too small for a man like me, but for someone your size. The implication was clear. You want me to break into his office? I want us to break into his office, he corrected, but you would have to be the one to go inside. I can create a distraction, draw the guards away, but you would be alone in the heart of the enemy's den. The thought was terrifying. It went against every principle she'd ever been taught, but the rules of her old life didn't apply here. Thaddeus Pike had already declared war on her. It was time to fight back. There's something else, she said, her mind racing. My father kept detailed notebooks, a key to all his symbols, notes on the most valuable mineral deposits, analysis of the strategic importance of the railroad routes. If Pike has the maps and the notebooks, their value increases 100-fold. Joseph nodded slowly. Then we have to get it all. Maps, notebooks, instruments, everything. He looked at her, his expression deadly serious. If you are caught, they will not be kind. A woman, a thief, they will make an example of you. And if you are caught, she asked. A grim shadow passed over his face. Comanche warriors do not get trials in towns like Dusty Fork. The weight of their plan settled over them. It was insane. It was desperate. It was almost certainly a death sentence. But as she looked at Joseph, at the fierce determination in his eyes, she felt a strange sense of calm. She was no longer a victim. She was a conspirator, a fighter. When do we do this, she asked. Joseph looked up at the sky, where the last light of day was fading. Tomorrow night, there will be no moon. The town of Dusty Fork was a spider's web, and Thaddeus Pike sat in the very center. Elise spent the next day watching from the shadows, learning the town's rhythms. She saw Sheriff Carter take a heavy envelope from Pike in broad daylight. She saw Pike's enforcers, Frank Keeler and Tom Briggs, patrol the streets like wolves guarding their territory. She heard the whispers in the general store, stories of families who had crossed Pike and simply disappeared. He didn't just own the town, he possessed its soul. As darkness fell, she crouched in the alley behind Pike's opulent mining office, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The air was thick with tension. The plan was terrifyingly simple. Joseph would start a fire in the old abandoned livery stable at the far end of town. The chaos would be the perfect distraction. While the whole town was looking one way, she would slip through the back window and reclaim what was hers. But plans, she was quickly learning, had a way of unraveling. Heavy footsteps echoed in the alley. Two of Pike's men, their forms silhouetted by the lamplight from Main Street. She recognized the hulking shape of Frank Keeler. Pike wants everything locked up tight, Keeler grumbled. He's got some big railroad men coming in the morning. He's closing the deal. Elise's blood ran cold. In the morning, they didn't have days. They had hours. What's he selling? The other man, Briggs, asked. Those maps he took off that French girl, Keeler said with a chuckle. Says they're a goddamn treasure map. Show every vein of silver, every drop of water, and the perfect path to lay track right through Indian country. He's keeping them in his private safe until the meeting. A safe. The word was a death knell to their plan. She could slip through a window, but she couldn't crack a safe. It was over. All of it. Just then a shout echoed from the far end of town, followed by the crackle of flames and the sharp report of a gunshot. Joseph's distraction, it had begun, but it was too late. The maps were locked away. She was about to signal to Joseph to abort when she saw it. Through the grimy window of the office, she could see Pike's desk, and scattered across it, illuminated by a single oil lamp, were papers. Maps. Her father's maps. Pike's arrogance had been their undoing, and now it was their only hope. He had been studying his prize, and in his haste, he hadn't put them back. The sounds of the fire grew, men shouting, boots pounding on the boardwalks. This was her only chance. She scrambled up a crate, worked the latch on the small window, and squeezed through the opening, tumbling silently onto the floor of the office. The room was a monument to Pike's greed, but her eyes were fixed on the desk. She moved towards it, her hands trembling. There they were, her father's work, his legacy. She began to gather them, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and triumph. Then she saw the ledger. It was open on the corner of the desk. Pike's crude handwriting filled the pages. It wasn't just a record of his mining operations. It was a diary of his crimes. Bribes to Sheriff Carter, payments to judges, plans to defraud the government, names, dates, amounts. It was a confession, written in ink. This was more than just the maps. This was the key to destroying him completely. She began stuffing the papers into her dress, her hands working frantically. The maps, the notebooks, and several torn-out pages from the damning ledger. Time was running out. The shouts outside were getting closer, and that's when she heard it. The sound of a key turning in the front door lock. The door creaked open. Heavy footsteps entered the office. A voice, cold and familiar, cut through the darkness. Thaddeus Pike's voice. "Keeler," he commanded. "Check the back room. Make sure everything's secure." Elise dove behind the heavy oak desk, pressing herself into the shadows. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. She was trapped. Keeler's massive frame filled the doorway, blocking the light from the front room. His dead eyes scanned the space. She could feel his gaze pass right over her hiding spot. An eternity passed in a single, terrifying second. "Looks clear, boss," Keeler grunted. "Safe is locked. Papers are right where you left them." The darkness that had hindered her was now her only shield. Pike grunted in satisfaction from the other room. "Good. Blow out the lamp, Keeler. Let's get back to the ranch. Big day tomorrow." The lamp in the front room was extinguished, plunging the entire office into absolute blackness. It was now or never. Elise scrambled toward the window, her every movement a thunderclap in the suffocating silence. She climbed onto the sill, her dress snagging on a splinter of wood. The fabric tore with a rip that sounded as loud as a gunshot. What was that? Keeler's voice sharp with suspicion. Just a cat in the alley, Pike's voice replied, but it was laced with uncertainty. Go check it out. Heavy footsteps started toward her. She was out of time. With a desperate heave, she threw herself through the opening, tumbling hard into the alley outside. She was scraped, bruised, her dress in tatters, but she was out, and she had the evidence. A roar of fury erupted from the office. Boss, the window's open. Someone's been in here. The game was up. Lights flared to life. Men shouted. Doors slammed. The hunt had begun. Elise scrambled to her feet and ran, melting into the shadows as Pike's empire began to burn, both literally and figuratively, behind her. The town exploded into chaos. Find them! Pike's voice was a raw, primal scream of fury. I want them found, and I want what they took back. His men fanned out, lanterns and torches cutting through the night, turning Main Street into a nightmarish landscape of shifting shadows and angry shouting men. Elise pressed herself into the deep darkness at the mouth of the alley, her lungs burning, the stolen documents a crinkling, dangerous burden against her chest. There was no way out. They were covering every exit. Then a hand clamped over her mouth, pulling her deeper into the shadows. She tried to scream, to fight, but a voice whispered in her ear, low and urgent. Don't move! It's me! Joseph! Relief washed over her so intensely her legs almost gave out. He had come back for her. His paint horse stood behind him, a silent ghost in the darkness. Did you get them? He breathed. She nodded, pulling out the edge of a map. His eyes widened. And more, she whispered. His ledger. Proof of everything. Just then, a new sound cut through the chaos. The thunder of hoofbeats, a dozen or more, coming from the direction of Pike's ranch. Reinforcements. At their head was a lean, silver-haired man who moved with the deadly grace of a panther. Jacob Stone, Joseph murmured, his voice tight. Pike's top enforcer, a professional killer. This just got much worse. Stone conferred with Pike in the middle of the street. Pike's voice carried on the night air. It was the French girl, and she has help. Find them. I want them alive. For a little while. A cold dread settled in Elise's stomach. They were no longer just thieves. They were targets. Stone began issuing orders with cold efficiency, dispatching search parties to comb through the town, house by house. The net was closing. We can't stay here, Joseph whispered. Follow me. He led her through a maze of back alleys, a world of trash bins and sleeping dogs, moving with a silent confidence that was breathtaking. They emerged behind Murphy's saloon. The sounds of the search were getting closer, the splintering of doors, the angry shouts of Stone's men. Joseph pulled a bundle from his saddlebag. Inside were several glass bottles filled with kerosene and a bundle of rags. Elise stared at him, understanding dawning. A distraction? More than a distraction, Joseph said, his face illuminated by the distant flames of the livery fire. Pike's power comes from his office, his money, his records. We're going to burn it all to the ground. We're going to give him a choice, chase us or save his empire. The audacity of it was terrifying. Arson. In a dry as tinder frontier town, it was a death sentence if they were caught. But as she heard Stone's men kicking in the door of the building next to the alley, she knew it was their only chance. What do I do? She asked, her voice steady. He handed her one of the bottles. When I give the signal, you run into the street and throw this through the big front window of his office. Then you run for the horse and don't look back. Understand? She nodded, her hand gripping the cool glass. This was it, the point of no return. They crept back toward Main Street. The search parties were moving systematically down the street, getting closer with every second. Pike's office, the symbol of his power, stood dark and momentarily forgotten. Joseph raised a hand. The moment stretched, taut and fragile. Elise could hear her own heartbeat, a frantic, wild thing. His hand dropped. She broke from the shadows, a fleeting figure in the chaos. She drew her arm back and hurled the bottle with all her strength. It crashed through the plate glass window with a satisfying shatter. A second later, Joseph's bottle followed. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. The inside of the office erupted in a whoosh of orange flame. the dry paper, the wooden furniture. It all went up like a torch. The fire wasn't just burning. It was roaring, a hungry beast devouring everything in its path. Shouts of alarm turned to cries of panic. Fire! Pike's office is on fire! For a precious few seconds, the hunt was forgotten. Every man, even Pike himself, stared in horror as the heart of his operation was consumed by flames. That was all the time they needed. Elise sprinted for the horse as Joseph materialized beside her. He threw her into the saddle and leaped up behind her, spurring the paint horse into a full gallop. They charged out of the alley, a fleeting glimpse of two figures escaping into the night, leaving behind a town engulfed in flames and chaos. As they cleared the edge of town, Elise risked a look back. She saw the orange glow lighting up the night sky. She saw the frantic, useless efforts of men trying to fight the inferno. And she saw one figure, Jacob Stone, standing apart from the rest. He wasn't looking at the fire. He was looking directly at them. And he was smiling. They rode through the night, pushing the horse to its limit, the stolen documents a constant, vital weight against Elise's chest. The glow of Dusty Fork faded behind them, but the image of Jacob Stone's smile was burned into her mind. Why had he smiled? It was as if he had wanted them to escape. Just before dawn, they reached the hidden canyon in the Comanche camp. But there was no welcome. Warriors emerged from their lodges, weapons in hand, their faces grim and hostile. An old war chief, his name was Eagle Feather, confronted Joseph, his voice sharp with anger. He says you have brought the white man's war to our home, Joseph translated, his own voice tight. He says Pike will not let this go. He will hunt for us, and when he finds this place, he will bring death. The weight of her actions crashed down on Elise. In her fight for justice, had she doomed these people? Tell him, she said, her voice clear and strong, stepping forward to face the war chief herself. Tell him I did not come empty-handed. She carefully unwrapped the documents. She unrolled one of her father's survey maps, the one showing the railroad's path cutting through their sacred lands. She held up the pages from Pike's ledger, showing the bribes and the names of the corrupt officials. This is proof, she said, meeting Eagle Feather's hard gaze. Proof of their lies. Proof that can destroy Pike, not just in Dusty Fork, but in the white man's courts. Joseph translated, his voice ringing with a new energy. The warriors murmured, their hostility slowly being replaced by a cautious interest. An ancient woman, Mary Wise Crow, the keeper of their history, stepped forward. She examined the documents with an expert eye, her weathered fingers tracing the lines on the map. She says the proof is strong, Joseph said after the old woman spoke, but the white man's law is a snake. It can bite the hand that holds it. These documents were stolen. A corrupt judge could throw them out. Just when despair threatened to return, Wise Crow spoke again, her eyes fixed on Elise. She says there is another way, Joseph translated. You must become more than a thief. You must become a witness. You must take this evidence to the one honest lawman in this territory, Marshal William Hartley in Amarillo. You must testify, under oath, to Pike's crimes. The idea was daunting, to ride across hundreds of miles of hostile territory, hunted by Pike's men, to deliver herself into the hands of a law she no longer trusted. Eagle Feather spoke again, his tone less hostile, more calculating. He says Pike's men are already searching. They are led by a tracker who knows the desert. We cannot simply hide here and wait. The risk is too great. Then came the first twist they never saw coming. A young warrior, one who had been standing silently at the back, stepped forward. His name was Little Fox. He looked ashamed, his eyes downcast. He spoke in a rush of Comanche, his voice filled with guilt. Joseph's face went pale. What is it? What did he say? Elise asked. Joseph turned to her, his expression a mask of disbelief and fury. Pike's tracker. He didn't have to find this place. He was led here. He looked at Little Fox with utter contempt. Pike bought him, whiskey and gold. He left a trail for them to follow, a trail that leads directly to this camp. A scout's cry from the canyon rim confirmed their worst fears. Riders, a dozen of them, approaching fast. Panic erupted. They had been betrayed from within. The sanctuary was no longer safe. It was a trap. Eagle Feather let out a sharp command. The warriors fanned out, taking defensive positions among the rocks. They were outnumbered, but they would fight to protect their homes. "You must go," Joseph said, grabbing Elise's arm and pulling her toward the horses. "You and the documents are the only thing that matters. We will hold them off, buy you time." "No, I won't leave you. You must," he insisted, his eyes blazing. "This fight is for nothing if the truth dies with us here. Wise Crow, give her the map of the old trails. Little Fox, you will guide her. You will redeem your betrayal with her life." The young, disgraced warrior nodded, his face a grim mask. He would guide her or die trying. As the first shots echoed through the canyon, Joseph threw Elise onto a fresh horse. "Ride for Amarillo. Don't stop for anything. Go." She galloped out of the canyon's hidden exit, the sounds of the battle fading behind her, tears streaming down her face. She was once again on the run, but this time she carried not just her own hopes, but the fate of an entire people. And she was being led by the very man who had betrayed them all. The desert was a furnace, the sun a relentless hammer. For 2 days, Elise and the young warrior, Little Fox, rode east, following trails that were invisible to her city eyes. They spoke little. His shame was a wall between them, and her grief for Joseph and his people was a raw, open wound. Every shadow looked like one of Pike's men. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. On the 3rd day, they saw a plume of dust on the horizon, not behind them, but ahead. "Riders," Little Fox said, his voice a dry rasp. "Waiting for us." It was an ambush. Pike must have had a second party circling around to cut them off. They were trapped. The trail ahead led through a narrow canyon, a perfect kill box. There was no other way around. "We can't go through," Elise said, her heart sinking. Little Fox looked at the canyon, then at her. For the first time, she saw a flicker of the warrior he was supposed to be in his eyes. "I led them to my people," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I will not let them take you." He turned his horse. "I will lead them away. Ride through the canyon as fast as you can. Do not look back." "They'll kill you." A sad smile touched his lips. "It is a better death than the one I deserve." Before she could protest, he let out a wild war cry and spurred his horse out onto the open plain, riding directly toward the distant riders, making himself the perfect target. The men in the ambush, surprised, turned their attention to him, giving chase. He was buying her time with his life. Tears blinded her, but she did as he said. She rode into the narrow canyon, the thunder of her horse's hooves echoing off the rock walls. She didn't look back. She owed him that. She cleared the canyon and rode for another hour before she dared to stop, her horse lathered and trembling. She was alone in the middle of a vast, unforgiving wilderness, with a fortune in stolen documents and a whole territory wanting her dead. That's when she heard a single horse approaching from behind. She spun around, her hand instinctively going for the small knife Joseph had given her. It wasn't Pike's men. It was a single rider, sitting calmly on his horse at the mouth of the canyon she had just exited. It was Jacob Stone. He wasn't holding a gun. He was just watching her, that same unsettling smile on his face. "You're a hard woman to keep up with, Miss Lauren," he said, his voice calm and conversational. "What do you want?" she demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "The same thing you do," he said, surprising her. "I want Thaddeus Pike destroyed." She stared at him, bewildered. "But you're his enforcer, his right-hand man." Stone chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Let's just say Mr. Pike has become bad for business. He's gotten too greedy, too loud. He's attracting the wrong kind of attention." He tipped his hat. "Like federal marshals. I was hired by some very wealthy men, the same railroad men Pike was trying to sell your maps to. My job was to keep him in line, make sure the deal went smoothly, but he's gone rogue. He thinks he can build his own empire. My employers want him removed, permanently." This was a twist she could never have imagined. The monster hunting her was now offering an alliance. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her mind reeling. "Because right now, Pike's main force is riding back to the Comanche camp, thinking you're trapped there, and his other party is chasing a ghost across the plains. You have a window, but not for long. Pike isn't stupid. He'll figure it out. You'll never make it to Amarillo alone." He had a point. She was lost, exhausted, and being hunted. "What's your proposal?" she asked. "Pike has a weakness," Stone said, his eyes glittering. "Greed. Your father's maps don't just show railroad routes. I've seen them. They hint at something more. Old Spanish mineral claims, a lost silver mine. It's what drove Pike truly mad with greed. We're going to use that. We'll leak a rumor that you're heading for the mine, that you found it. Pike won't be able to resist coming himself. And when he does," Stone let the sentence hang in the air, "we'll be waiting for him." "A trap," Elise breathed. "A trap," Stone confirmed. "I'll get you to Amarillo. You give your testimony. While the law's getting its boots on, Pike will ride into our little welcome party in the Badlands, and he'll never ride out." It was a deal with the devil, to trust this killer, to conspire in a man's death, even a man like Pike. But what choice did she have? The fate of Joseph and his people depended on her. "One condition," she said, "we get help. For the Comanche, the ones fighting at the canyon." Stone considered it for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. There's a company of cavalry at Fort Elliott. I have friends there. I'll send a rider. Tell them there's an illegal militia attacking peaceful natives. It might just be enough to even the odds." He extended a hand. "Do we have a deal, Miss Lauren?" She looked at his outstretched hand, the hand of a killer, and she took it. She was no longer just a victim or a thief. She was a player in a deadly game, and she was about to bet everything on a single, desperate play. The ride to Amarillo was a blur of paranoia and exhaustion. Jacob Stone was true to his word. He navigated the back trails with an expert skill, and a day out from the city, he arranged for a rider to be sent to Fort Elliott. But Elise never let her guard down. She slept with one eye open, the stolen documents her constant companion. When they finally saw the buildings of Amarillo on the horizon, she felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. Stone left her at the edge of town. "Marshal Hartley's office is in the Federal Building. Go clean yourself up first. A lady of quality will be heard much faster than a woman who looks like she just crawled out of the desert." His final words were a chilling reminder of their pact. "Remember our deal. You get the law moving. I'll handle Pike." She found a boarding house run by a kind Mexican woman, Carmen Valdez, who had heard the wild stories about the woman who burned down Pike's office. Carmen, who had her own reasons to hate Pike, gave Elise a room, a bath, and a simple, respectable dress. An hour later, Elise was transformed. She walked into the Federal Building not as a fugitive, but as a determined woman on a mission. Marshal William Hartley was a sharp, intelligent man with eyes that seemed to look right through you. He listened to her story without interruption, his expression unreadable. She laid the documents out on his desk, the maps, the treaty violations, the pages from Pike's ledger. "This is quite an accusation, Miss Lauren," Hartley said when she had finished. "And these documents, you admit you stole them?" "I admit I reclaimed my stolen property, Marshal, and in doing so, I uncovered a criminal conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of this territory." Hartley studied the papers, his fingers drumming on the desk. For a terrible moment, Elise thought he was going to dismiss her, to arrest her. Was he one of Pike's men too? Then he looked up, and a flicker of something, admiration perhaps, was in his eyes. "It would take me weeks to get the warrants and approvals to act on this. Pike has powerful friends. He'll have this whole investigation buried in paperwork before I can even leave Amarillo." "So you're not going to do anything?" Elise asked, her heart sinking. "I didn't say that," Hartley said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I said I can't act, but I have been hearing rumors. Rumors of a man named Jacob Stone causing trouble for Pike, and other rumors about a lost Spanish silver mine in the Badlands." He looked directly at her. If Pike were to be unavoidably detained by a rival while on his way to this mythical mine, it would certainly make my job of rounding up his corrupted associates much, much easier. The Marshal of Amarillo was sanctioning their trap. He knew. He somehow knew the entire plan. He was giving them his unspoken blessing to do what the law was too slow to accomplish. As Elise left his office, the full, terrifying scope of the game became clear. This wasn't just about her, or Pike, or the Comanche. It was a war for the soul of the territory, being fought in the shadows by men like Hartley and Stone. And she was the linchpin. 2 days later, the trap was set. Elise, using Carmen's connections, had leaked the location of the mythical mine, a location carefully chosen by Stone in a treacherous part of the Badlands. As predicted, Pike's greed was his undoing. Word came that he was riding out from Dusty Fork with a dozen of his best men, heading straight for them. Elise waited with Stone and a handful of his own hand-picked men in a narrow rocky canyon. The tension was unbearable. This was where it would end, one way or another. Then came the sound of hoofbeats. Pike's party riding hard. But something was wrong. There weren't a dozen men. There were 30, and Pike wasn't leading them. Sheriff Ben Carter of Dusty Fork was, and chained to his saddle was a prisoner. A beaten, bloody, but still defiant prisoner. It was Joseph Running Bear. Pike rode up beside the sheriff, a triumphant, demonic grin on his face. "Looking for this little map maker?" he roared, gesturing to Joseph. "The cavalry you sent for got to the camp, all right. But I got there first. Your warrior friend here didn't put up much of a fight. It was another trap. A trap within a trap." Stone's message to the cavalry had been a ruse, a way to lure them into a false sense of security. But how did Pike know? "Surprised?" Pike sneered, looking not at Elise but at Jacob Stone. "You didn't really think I'd trust a snake like you, did you, Jacob? I've known you were working for the railroad boys from the start. I just let you think your little plan was working." Stone's face was a mask of cold fury. He had been played. They all had. "And as for you, my dear Miss Lauren," Pike said, his eyes landing on her, "you have caused me a great deal of trouble, but you've also led me to a great treasure, not just the silver mine, but him." He jerked a thumb toward Joseph. "The Comanche will pay anything to get their precious war chief back. And you get to watch him die, right after I deal with your friend here." Pike raised his pistol and pointed it directly at Jacob Stone's head. But before he could fire, another shot rang out. It didn't come from Stone's men. It came from Sheriff Carter. Pike stared down at the red stain spreading across his own chest, a look of utter shock on his face. He staggered, then fell from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. Chaos erupted. Pike's men, stunned, turned on the sheriff, but Stone's men opened fire. The canyon became a slaughterhouse. Sheriff Carter rode over to Elise, ignoring the gunfight raging around them. He calmly unlocked Joseph's chains. "Marshal Hartley sends his regards," the sheriff said with a wry smile. "Told you he couldn't act officially, but he's been my boss for 2 years. Been waiting for a chance to take Pike down from the inside." The ultimate twist. The corrupt sheriff was a deep-cover federal agent. The entire game had been a setup, orchestrated by Marshal Hartley from the very beginning. He had used her, used Stone, used all of them as pawns to checkmate a king. As the dust settled and the last of Pike's men were either dead or captured, Joseph staggered to his feet. He and Elise looked at each other across the blood-soaked ground. They had won. It was over. But the victory felt strange, hollow. They had been manipulated, their quest for justice used as a part of a larger, colder calculation. They had survived, but the brutal reality of how the frontier was truly won left a bitter taste in their mouths. The trial that followed was a sensation. With Sheriff Carter's testimony and the evidence from Pike's own ledger, the entire corrupt network was dismantled. Judges, land agents, and politicians were all brought to justice. Elise's father's maps, once a tool for greed, became the foundation for a new, fairer survey of the territory. The Comanche treaty lands were secured, their boundaries guaranteed by federal law. Joseph, his bravery now legendary, became the official liaison between his people and the territorial government, ensuring the promises made would finally be kept. And Elise? She was offered a position as the territory's chief cartographer. She had arrived in Texas a mail-order bride, deemed worthless. She would now be the woman who drew the maps for its future. Months later, she stood with Joseph on a high mesa, looking out over the vast, beautiful land that had almost destroyed them. The scars of their battle remained, but for the first time, the future felt peaceful. Do you ever regret it? Joseph asked quietly. Leaving your old life behind? Elise thought of the woman who had sat on those railroad tracks, a woman so broken she had wished for death. She was a ghost, a memory. I came here looking for a home, she said, taking his hand. I just never imagined I would have to burn down the world to build it. They had faced down corruption, betrayal, and death itself. They had been used as pawns in a shadowy war, but in the end, they had seized their own destiny, rewriting the map of not just a territory, but of their own lives. They had proven that in a land of monsters and schemers, the most powerful force of all was the courage of two people, from two different worlds, united in a fight for justice. That was a wild ride, wasn't it? A story of how, even when you feel like you have absolutely nothing, you might have the one thing that can change everything, the will to fight back. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales from the edge of the map, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single twist. We'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was the most shocking turn of events for you? Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.